Beneath the eternal gaze of the frost moon, sigils etched in starlight scarred the newborn's flesh, a prophecy woven in light and exile. Elena Frostmark had never known the warmth of a pack's embrace, only the bite of glacial winds that carved her world into jagged isolation. Born in the shadowed birthing caves of Erholt, where the mountains clawed at the sky like desperate fingers, she entered life marked as aberration. The midwives, their faces pale as fresh snow, had recoiled at the sight of her skin, luminous sigils pulsing faintly across her arms, her throat blooming like veins of captured moonlight. "Unclean," the elders had whispered, their voices echoing through the ice-veined halls. "A monster's brand, sent by the Diusa to test our faith." From that first breath, Elena was deemed omen, her cries muffled by the howl of the northern gales that swept down from the ravines. 17 winters had etched their cruelty into her bones, each one a layer of frost upon her solitude. The pack of Erholt, fierce guardians of the glacial borders, had confined her to a crumbling hut on the periphery, a forgotten spur of rock overlooking the endless white expanse. There, amid the creak of settling ice and the distant rumble of avalanches, she learned to survive on scraps tossed from afar, like offerings to a restless spirit. Her mother, a quiet omega who had dared to birth such a child, had vanished into the blizzards shortly after, her scent lost to the wind. Whispers said she had wandered into the ravines, seeking the Diusa's mercy or judgment. Elena did not weep for her. Tears froze too easily in this realm, crystallizing into shards that cut deeper than sorrow. The sigils were her constant companions, silent now but ever present, glowing faintly under her threadbare furs when the moon hung full and merciless. She traced them in the dim light of her single tallow lamp, wondering at their meaning. Were they curses, as the elders claimed, harbingers of doom for the packs that ruled the frozen north? Or something more, a map to paths unseen, a gift shrouded in fear? The pack shunned her, their eyes averted during rare glimpses, their weavos rising in the night like accusations. She was Omega, yes, but twisted by fate, unfit for mating, for belonging. Strength, she had been taught, lay in the pack's unyielding hierarchy, in the Alpha's iron rule, and the Beta's loyal fire. What was strength, if not the choice to endure alone, to let the cold forge mercy from despair? Nights blurred into days under the pallid sun, the air thick with the scent of pine resin and impending storm. Elena ventured into the ravines only when hunger gnawed deepest, her boots crunching through snowdrifts that swallowed lesser souls. The wind carried echoes, weavos from the heart of Erholt, where the great hall burned with hearth fires and the Alpha Council's decrees shaped the realm. They spoke of wars brewing in the shadowed valleys beyond, rival packs vying for the sacred lunar springs that fed their power. But Elena was no part of that tapestry. She was the frayed thread, discarded. It came on a night when the moon bled crimson through storm clouds, its light fracturing on the ice like shattered vows. The first tremors shook the earth, a low growl rising from the depths, as if the mountains themselves stirred in rage. Elena huddled by her fire, the flames dancing shadows across her sigils when the horizon ignited. Torches, hundreds, thousands, swarmed the borders like a tide of blood-red fury. Invaders from the southern clans, their banners black as ravens' wings, had breached the wards. War, long whispered, had arrived with claws bared. From her perch, she watched the slaughter unfold, a visceral ballet under the storm-lashed sky. Weavos tore the night, mingled with the wet rip of fangs and the crack of bones on frozen ground. The air grew heavy with the metallic tang of blood, steaming as it met the snow. Erholt's warriors, led by the Alpha King Thorn Blackridge, fought with the ferocity of cornered wolves, his form a blur of steel and shadow, his roar commanding the line. But the enemy was relentless, their shamans chanting dark rites that twisted the wind into blades. One by one, the packs fell. The frost-marked sentinels overrun, the lunar guards scattered like ash. Elena pressed against the hut's wall, heart pounding in rhythm with the distant thunder of hooves and howls. Her sigils stirred, a faint warmth uncoiling beneath her skin, as if awakening to the chaos. She had always felt the pull of the moon, a spiritual tether to the Deuce's ancient weave. But this was different, alive, insistent. Flashes of vision assaulted her, rivers of ice cracking under unseen pressure, packs dissolving into mist, a throne empty beneath a fractured sky. The collapse of order the elders had foretold in their dire sermons would birth monsters or saviors. Was this it? Her breath fogged the air, mingling with the smoke rising from the valley below. As dawn clawed its way through the clouds, gray and unforgiving, the battle's roar faded to mournful whimpers. Airholt lay in ruins, its great hall a smoldering pyre, the Alpha Council slain in a single, treacherous night, ambushed by a traitor from within, or so the dying Uivos claimed. Bodies littered the snow, crimson blooms against white, and survivors fled into the ravines, their scents laced with defeat. Elena emerged from her shelter, trembling, the wind whipping her dark hair like a banner of defiance. Her sigils now burned brighter, illuminating the desolation, responding to the void left by fallen kings. She was no warrior, no chosen one of prophecy. Yet in that moment, as the realm fractured and hope bled out onto the ice, her marks declared otherwise. The last omega of a broken line. Marked as monster since birth, she stood at the edge of the abyss, not chosen, but surviving where all else had failed. Fear coiled in her gut, cold as the ravines, but beneath it stirred something fiercer, a question whispered by the Deuce's breath. What if the curse was the key? What if redemption began not in glory, but in the shadow of the rejected? The wind howled its challenge, carrying the faint echo of a lone wolf's cry, and Elena stepped forward into the unknown, her light the only beacon in the gathering storm. The snow clung to Elena's boots like reluctant memories, each step a surrender to the ravine's unforgiving pull. The air hung heavy with the aftermath of slaughter, charred wood and iron-rich blood mingling in the wind's ceaseless lament. Her sigils throbbed now, not with the faint pulse of isolation, but an insistent rhythm, as if the earth's wounds had seeped into her veins. She moved toward the valley's heart, drawn by an unseen thread, the Deuce's whisper urging her past the safety of her hut. Fear tasted like frost on her tongue, sharp and metallic, but curiosity burned hotter, a spark against the cold void of loss. The ravines twisted like the scars of forgotten gods, sheer walls of ice-glazed rock rising on either side, their shadows swallowing the weak light of the rising sun. Elena's breath came in shallow bursts, fogging the air before her as she navigated the treacherous path. Bodies lay strewn in the drifts, warriors she had glimpsed from afar, their furs torn, eyes staring blankly at the indifferent sky. One, a young beta with a frost-rimed beard, clutched a broken spear. His final breath had etched patterns in the snow, fleeting as prayers unanswered. She averted her gaze, but the sigils on her arms flared brighter, illuminating the crimson stains with an ethereal glow. What was this power stirring within her? Not a weapon, but a mirror, reflecting the realm's unraveling. A low groan shattered the silence, pulling her deeper into the gorge. It came from a crevice half hidden by an overhang of jagged ice, where the wind howled through like a mournful dirge. Elena froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. Instinct screamed retreat. Omegas did not meddle in the remnants of kings, but the sound tugged at her, raw and human beneath the wolfish timbre. She crept closer, her fingers brushing the cold stone, sigils casting silvery veins across the rock face. There, slumped against the ice, was a figure that stole her breath. He was Alpha in every line of his form, broad-shouldered, clad in the remnants of blackened armor, etched with the lunar crest of Airholt's fallen council. Blood matted his dark hair, streaking down a face carved by battles long before this night. high cheekbones shadowed by stubble, eyes like storm-tossed seas, half-lidded in exhaustion. A deep gash marred his side, seeping through makeshift bandages of torn cloak, and his hand rested on the hilt of a sword buried in the snow beside him. Thorn Blackridge, the Alpha King himself, or what was left of him after the traitor's blade had turned the tide. He stirred at her approach, a growl rumbling from his chest, low and warning. "Stay back, Shadow Wraith," he rasped, voice like gravel under boot. His eyes snapped open, locking onto her with feral intensity, but faltered as they traced the glowing sigils on her skin. Recognition flickered, mingled with something darker. Guilt, perhaps, for the isolation he had upheld in his rule. "You, the marked one, from the outskirts, what devilry brings you here?" Elena's pulse thundered, an instinctive pull coiling in her core, the Omega's ancient call to protect, to heal. Yet fear clamped her throat. Alphas like him had decreed her exile, their gazes turning her into myth, into monster. She should flee, leave him to the encroaching cold or the southern hunters who would finish what the battle began. But his scent reached her, pine and smoke, laced with the copper of wounds, and her sigils warmed in response, a bridge she could not ignore. "I heard your pain," she whispered, voice barely above the wind. "The ravines echo everything. You're bleeding out. Let me help, or die alone like the rest." Thorn's laugh was bitter, a sound that cracked the air like fracturing ice. He shifted, wincing, his free hand pressing against the gash. "Help? From an Omega cursed by the Dusa? The council called you Omen Girl. I enforced it. Duty demanded no less. Now the packs are ash because of my blindness, a traitor's whisper in my ear." His words hung heavy, etched with the weight of a crown that had slipped through bloodied fingers. Melancholy shadowed his features, the ethical king who had chosen order over compassion, now haunted by the cost. He was no conqueror in this moment, but a man adrift, his strength ebbing with each labored breath. She knelt, despite herself, curiosity overriding the denial, screaming in her mind. The connection sparked unbidden, instinctive, like the moon drawing tides, yet she rationalized it away. Mere survival, nothing more. Her hands, trembling, peeled back the sodden cloth from his wound. The gash was vicious, flesh torn by claw or blade, but beneath it, his skin bore faint scars, old oaths sworn under lunar light. "Hold still," she murmured, tearing a strip from her own furs. The wind whipped around them, carrying distant huevos, survivors or pursuers. It mattered not. As she bound the injury, her sigils brushed his arm, and a jolt passed between them, warmth blooming in her chest, visions flickering at the edge of sight. Rivers of fate converging, a path through the storm. Thorn tensed, his gaze searching hers, denial warring with the pull. "This changes nothing. You're still the outcast. I'm still the fool king who let the realm burn." But his hand lingered on hers a fraction too long, the touch electric, born of fear's fragile curiosity. The snow began to fall again, fat flakes veiling the ravine, as if the Dusa herself shrouded their improbable union. In that suspended breath, as the cold deepened and shadows lengthened, Elena felt the first crack in her isolation, a bond forged not in warmth, but in the raw edge of shared ruin. Yet doubt lingered, sharp as the wind's bite. Could a monster tend a fallen king without becoming his chain? And now I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. The crevice's icy embrace tightened as the first flakes of snow thickened into a veil, blurring the ravine's jagged edges into a world of white oblivion. Elena pressed her back against the frozen wall, Thorn's weight half leaning on her shoulder, his labored breaths syncing with the wind's relentless sigh. The binding on his wound held, for now, a fragile truce against the blood's insistent seep. But the air carried new threats, the distant crunch of boots on snow, muffled voices laced with the guttural cadence of southern tongues. Hunters, survivors of the invasion, scouring the gorges for stragglers like them. She could smell their intent, acrid as forge smoke, cutting through the metallic tang of Thorn's injury. "We can't stay," she whispered, her voice a thread in the gathering storm. Her sigils pulsed faintly, casting erratic glimmers on the ice overhead, like stars trapped in a collapsing sky. Fear coiled in her belly, not just for her own fragile life, but for this broken king whose presence had shattered her solitude. Why him? Why now, when the Deuce's weave seemed intent on unraveling everything? Empathy stirred unbidden, a warmth against the cold, his pain mirroring her own long exile, two outcasts bound by the night's cruelty. Thorn nodded, grimacing as he pushed to his feet, sword in hand. His eyes, shadowed by pain and the weight of command, met hers with a flicker of reluctant trust. "The Southerners. They won't stop until the last of Erholt's blood is spilled. Lead on, Marked One. Your light might guide us yet." There was no mockery in his tone, only the raw edge of a man who had lost his throne to betrayal, his ethical core frayed by the guilt of lives he could not save. He had enforced her isolation, yes, duty's cold decree. But in his gaze now lingered the melancholy of a ruler who questioned every choice that led to ash. They moved deeper into the ravine, Elena's steps sure on the treacherous ice, her Omega instincts honing paths through the labyrinth of stone and frost. The wind howled like a sentinel, whipping snow into their faces, stinging like accusations. Thorn followed close, his free hand brushing hers occasionally for balance, each touch sending a jolt through her sigils, a spark of connection she denied, even as it bloomed. It was survival, she told herself, rationalizing the instinctive pull that drew her to his side. Alphas were storms, Omegas the quiet earth. This was no destiny, merely the Deuce's whim in a world gone mad. The sounds grew nearer, harsh commands in a foreign dialect, the snap of crossbows loading. Elena pulled Thorn into a narrow fissure, its walls slick with meltwater that dripped like tears from the overhanging ice. They crouched in the dimness, hearts pounding in unison, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and fear sweat. Her sigils dimmed to a subtle glow, as if sensing the need for concealment, veiling them in shadow. Outside, shadows flitted past. 3 southern warriors, their armor glinting dully under cloaks of raven feathers, spears tipped with obsidian that drank the light. One paused, sniffing the air, his eyes narrowing on the crevice. "Blood trail ends here," he growled, voice like grinding gravel. The king's scent, faint but fresh, flushed them out. Elena's breath hitched, her hand instinctively reaching for Thorn's arm. He tensed, muscles coiling for a fight he could scarcely win, but she squeezed, a silent plea. Empathy surged then, fierce and unyielding. She saw not the king who had banished her kind, but the man scarred by duty's blade, his melancholy a echo of her own rejection. In that moment, protecting him felt like reclaiming her own worth, not as monster, but as guardian. The warriors advanced, boots scraping perilously close. Thorn shifted, ready to lunge, but Elena acted first. Her sigils ignited suddenly, a controlled flare of light that mimicked the deceptive shimmer of melting ice, blinding, disorienting. The intruders recoiled, cursing as they stumbled back into the snow, their spears clattering. "Illusion! The Deuce's tricks!" One snarled, but the moment's chaos gave them breath. Thorn seized it, his sword flashing in a swift arc from the shadows, felling the nearest with a precise thrust born of desperate precision. Blood sprayed, warm and fleeting against the cold, steaming as it hit the ground. Elena surged forward then, her fear transmuting to fury. She grabbed a fallen spear, its weight foreign in her hands, and drove it into the second warrior's thigh, eliciting a howl that echoed through the ravine. The third, turned tail, fleeing into the storm, but not before Thorn's blade silenced him with a final, merciful strike. They stood panting amid the fallen, snow already blanketing the crimson evidence, the wind carrying away the iron scent like a confession unspoken. Thorn slumped against the wall, wiping blood from his blade, his gaze finding hers amid the flurry. "You fought. For me." There was wonder in his voice, laced with the guilt that had shadowed him since the council's fall. The traitor, his own advisor, whispered rumors said, had sown discord, turning ally against ally. Now, in this refuge of ice and blood, he saw her not as omen, but as ally. "I deemed you unclean once. Duty blinded me to what strength truly is, the choice to show mercy, even to the rejected." Elena's chest tightened, the bond deepening like roots piercing frozen soil. She had resisted it, this instinctive tie, rationalizing it as fleeting need. But as she helped him staunch a fresh cut from the skirmish, her fingers lingering on his skin, empathy flowered into something irrevocable, a shared vulnerability, tender amid the tragedy. The sigils on her arms intertwined with the faint scars on his, glowing in harmony, as if the Dusa wove their fates together. Yet doubt lingered, a spiritual thorn. What was this pull, if not another chain? Love as redemption demanded proof, not promises. Could she trust a king whose world had rejected her? They pressed on to a hidden cave mouth, veiled by icicles like the Dusa's crystalline tears, a temporary sanctuary where fire could be kindled without betraying smoke. As the storm raged outside, Huevos distant and mournful, Elena kindled flames from scavenged tinder, the warmth a fragile defiance against the night. Thorn watched her, his melancholy softening into quiet gratitude, the first threads of a bond forged in mutual defense. But in the fire's dance, shadows whispered of greater trials ahead, the traitor's shadow looming, the realm's fractures demanding confrontation. In that hearth-lit refuge, as empathy bridged their wounds, Elena wondered, was strength not in enduring alone, but in choosing to shelter the storm? The fire crackled its answer, ambiguous as the moon's veiled face, leaving her heart suspended between fear and fragile hope. The fire's glow licked at the cave's icy walls, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters of the fallen packs. Elena sat cross-legged on the rough stone floor, her sigils subdued now to a soft luminescence, as if sated by the brief sanctuary. The air hummed with the storm's muffled fury outside, wind seeping through cracks to whisper secrets of the ravaged realm. Thorn lay propped against a boulder, his breathing steadier, the fresh wounds bound with strips from her cloak. Silence wrapped them, thick and contemplative, broken only by the crackle of flames and the distant drip of melting icicle. She traced the patterns on her forearm absent-mindedly, the sigils cool under her fingertips, yet alive with latent promise. Exhaustion tugged at her limbs, but sleep evaded her. The day's violence replayed in visceral flashes, the spray of blood on snow, the weight of the spear in her untrained hands, Thorn's surprised gratitude etching lines deeper into his face. He watched her now, his storm-gray eyes reflecting the fire's amber, melancholy etched in the furrow of his brow. The king who had once enforced her exile, now her reluctant companion, bore the scars of duty's betrayal. The traitor's name unspoken between them, a shadow that had orchestrated the council's slaughter. His ethical core, once unyielding as glacial steel, cracked under the weight of what-ifs. What if he had seen her not as curse, but as sign? "You saved us back there," he said at last, voice low, resonant with the rumble of hidden thunder. Not with fang or claw, but light. Those marks. They've always been more than the elders feared, haven't they? There was no accusation in his tone, only a probing curiosity laced with the guilt that haunted his every breath. He shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his side, but his gaze held hers, searching for truths the Diusa had long concealed. Elena drew her knees to her chest, the cold stone biting through her furs. The instinctive bond between them tugged insistently, a warmth she resisted labeling. Omega to Alpha, outcast to king, nothing more. Yet in the fire's intimacy, empathy had woven deeper threads, transforming fear into fragile alliance. "They've been my prison," she murmured, her voice threading through the cave's hush like smoke. "Glowing in the dark, drawing stares that branded me monster. But today, in the ravine, when the hunters closed in, they answered something. A call I didn't know I had." She extended her arm toward the flames, the sigils stirring faintly, veins of moonlight unfurling across her skin. The air grew charged, heavy with the scent of ozone and ancient pine, as if the Deusa inhaled deeply, preparing revelation. Thorn leaned forward, his hand hovering near hers, not touching, but close enough to feel the subtle heat radiating from her marks. The collapse woke them, the packs shattered, the lunar springs poisoned by the southern shaman's rites, order undone in a breath. I've felt it too, this unraveling, but you're tied to it. His words carried the melancholy of a ruler stripped bare, his ethical dilemmas laid raw. Had his rigid decrees, born of duty, blinded him to the spiritual weave? The traitor, his former advisor Eric, had exploited that blindness, whispering of omens to justify purges, only to sell the council's secrets for southern gold. Now, in this frozen exile, Thorn confronted the cost, his realm in ruins, his soul adrift. As the fire popped, sending embers spiraling upward, Elena's vision blurred at the edges. A pressure built within her, coiling like the wind before an avalanche. Her sigils igniting with sudden fervor. Light bloomed from her skin, not the erratic flare of before, but a deliberate radiance, threading outward like silver rivers seeking confluence. The cave walls shimmered, frost patterns shifting under the glow, revealing hidden fissures, paths etched into the ice, glowing faintly as if mapped by starlight. Visions cascaded through her mind. The fractured realm unfolding like a tapestry torn asunder, southern armies marching on tainted springs, packs scattering into the wilds. But amid the chaos, a convergence, her light guiding survivors through shadowed passes, illuminating wards long forgotten, binding the broken with threads of destiny. She gasped, the power surging through her veins like liquid fire, visceral and overwhelming. It was no curse, but a gift, the Pathfinder's mark, whispered in ancient lunar lore as the Deusa's chosen navigator through cataclysm. Her sigils weren't omens of doom, but beacons for rebirth, revealing paths where none existed, mending the spiritual fractures of a collapsing world. The revelation crashed over her, a wave of clarity amid the pain. Rejection had not defined her, but prepared her. Tears welled, hot against the cave's chill, tracing paths down her cheeks as the light pulsed in rhythm with her heart. Thorn's eyes widened, the realization dawning like moonlight-piercing storm clouds. He grasped her hand then fully, the contact sealing the vision's truth. A jolt of shared insight flooding him. Rivers of fate rerouting around her, the empty throne awaiting not conquest, but her guiding light. "By the Deusa," he breathed, voice thick with awe and lingering guilt. "You're the key, not to destruction, but to what remains. The Pathfinder." The elders buried the prophecy, fearing what they couldn't control. I upheld it, enforced your isolation to preserve order. But this... His thumb brushed her sigils, the touch tender, born of profound recognition. "This is redemption's proof. You've been the hope all along, Elena. The last light in a realm of shadows." The bond deepened in that instant, no longer denied but confronted. Instinctive pull evolving into spiritual tether, resisted no more. Yet doubt shadowed the epiphany, a moral thorn piercing her chest. Was this power hers to wield, or another chain binding her to a king's fractured legacy? Love as redemption demanded choice, not fate's decree. Could she illuminate his path without losing her own freedom? The fire dimmed as her light receded, leaving the cave in contemplative twilight, the weight of destiny settling like fresh snow, beautiful, burdensome, inevitable. Outside, the storm's huevos softened to a mournful cadence, as if the diosa herself pondered the revelation's cost. Elena met Thorn's gaze, the air between them electric with unspoken questions, her heart suspended in the fragile space between isolation's end and a trial yet to come. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw the cave's fragile peace shattered with the first gray light of dawn, filtering through the icicle-veined entrance like a reluctant witness. Elena stirred from a fitful sleep, her body aching from the stone's unyielding bite, the sigils on her skin now a subdued map of silver veins, humming with the afterglow of revelation. Thorn stood at the threshold, sword drawn, his silhouette etched against the swirling snow, a king reborn in quiet resolve, yet shadowed by the melancholy that clung to him like frost. The storm had ebbed, leaving the ravines cloaked in crystalline silence, but the air carried new scents, smoke from distant fires, the musk of gathered wolves, and beneath it all, the sour tang of betrayal. "We move at midday," he said, turning to her, his voice a low rumble that stirred the embers of their shared vision. "Survivors rally at the shattered lunar spring. If your light can guide us there, we confront what's left of the packs and the rot that felled them." His eyes held hers, storm-gray depths reflecting the ethical war within, the duty to reclaim order, weighed against the guilt of lives lost to his blindness. Eirik, the traitor advisor, had not perished in the slaughter. Whispers from fleeing scouts confirmed it. He lurked now with the Southern Alpha, Kael Ironfang, forging an unholy alliance to seize the fractured throne. Forgiveness was a luxury kings could ill afford, yet in Elena's gaze, Thorn glimpsed the mercy he had long denied. She rose, pulling her threadbare furs tighter, the cold seeping into her bones like doubt. The Pathfinder's gift burned in her veins, a spiritual fire that illuminated paths through chaos, but it demanded a price, entanglement in the realm's wounds, binding her to fates she had fled. Love, if that's what this insistent pull toward Thorn was, offered no easy crown, only the trial of choice. Freedom whispered of the wild ravines, solitude's cold embrace. The bond with him tugged toward confrontation, redemption forged in blood and forgiveness. What was strength, if not choosing compassion over the cycle of war? Her heart clenched, the wind outside moaning its indecision. They ventured forth as the sun clawed higher, a pallid orb veiled by clouds heavy with unspoken omens. Elena's sigils guided them, flaring softly to reveal hidden ledges and ice-bridged chasms, the light weaving through the ravines like the Deuce's own thread. Thorn walked beside her, his steps measured, the wound at his side a dull throb he ignored with stoic grace. Their silence was companionable now, laced with the tender tragedy of two souls scarred by rejection, his by betrayal, hers by birth. Occasional brushes of hands or shared glances sparked the connection deeper, resisted no longer but tested by the moral precipice ahead. The snow crunched underfoot, each step echoing the distant huevos of assembling packs, a chorus of desperation rising from the valley below. The lunar spring emerged like a wound in the earth, once a sacred pool fed by moon-kissed waters that bolstered the pack's power, now cracked and steaming, its surface tainted black by southern shamans' poisons. Remnants of Erholt's warriors gathered there, tattered betas and omegas, their eyes hollow with loss, fur matted with blood and grief. They parted as Thorn approached, murmurs rippling like wind through pines. "The king lives!" But suspicion lingered, their gazes sliding to Elena, the marked omega whose isolation they had enforced, her sigils now a beacon that both awed and unnerved. At the spring's edge stood Eirik, the traitor, his once noble frame gaunt under a cloak of southern black, flanked by Kale Ironfang, a rival alpha whose presence dominated like a gathering thunderhead. Kale was a colossus of fur and fang, his pelt scarred from southern wars, eyes burning with conquest's hunger. Eric's face twisted in false contrition, but his scent betrayed him. Ambition's rot mingled with the metallic edge of deceit. "Thorn?" he called, voice oily as melting fat. "The Dusa has spoken. The council's fall was judgment on your rigid rule. Join us. Kale offers alliance, not subjugation. The marked girl, a relic of old fears, cast her aside as we did the omens that weakened us." Thorn's growl vibrated through the air, low and lethal, his hand tightening on his sword. The packs shifted uneasily, the wind whipping banners of frozen mist from the spring, carrying the spiritual weight of the Deusa's fractured domain. Elena felt it all, their stares like needles on her skin, the sigils igniting in response, illuminating the poisoned waters with veins of purifying light. Visions assailed her, paths diverging from this moment, one of endless war where blood soaked the snow eternal, another of fragile unity born from mercy's blade. The confrontation crashed over her, visceral as the ravine's chill, the past embodied in Eric's treachery, the pack's complicit silence in her exile, Kale's rival ambition a mirror to unchecked power. She stepped forward, heart pounding like war drums, the bond with Thorn a anchor amid the storm. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, amplified by the sigil's glow. The light spread, revealing hidden toxins in the spring, threads of fate coiling around the gathered wolves, paths to healing or further ruin. The packs gasped, some kneeling in reverence, others recoiling as the monster's myth cracked. Eric sneered, lunging with a dagger drawn from his cloak, but Thorn intercepted, their clash a blur of steel and snarls, blood spraying hot against the cold air. Elena moved instinctively, her power surging to blind Eric's eyes with illusory moonlight, forcing him back. Kale roared, charging into the fray, his claws raking the earth, but the packs hesitated, her light stirring dormant faith, the Deuce's revelation piercing their despair. In the chaos, Thorn disarmed Eric, pinning him to the snow, the traitor's face a mask of crumbling lies. "Why?" Thorn demanded, voice raw with the ethical torment of brotherhood betrayed. "For power? For the South's scraps?" Eric spat blood, laughing bitterly. "Your mercy blinded you, King. The marked one was the sign. Unclean, as the elders knew. I acted to save us from her doom." But his words faltered under Elena's gaze, her sigils casting judgment's light, exposing the greed that had poisoned the spring and the realm. The moral crux bore down on her then, heavier than the mountains. Forgive Eric, offer the path to redemption, and risk war's escalation as Kale rallied his forces, or demand justice, aligning with Thorn's duty, and chain herself to the pack's hierarchy, her freedom sacrificed on love's altar. Thorn looked to her, his expression a plea wrapped in guilt. The king who had rejected her, now seeking her wisdom, the bond between them a tender flame amid the tragedy. "Choose with me, Elena," he murmured, as Kyle's Uivos summoned southern reinforcements, the wind howling war's approach. "Power or compassion, war or the light that mends." Her chest tightened, tears freezing on her lashes, the sigils pulsing with the weight of destiny's fork. Freedom beckoned in the wilds, unburdened. Love demanded she illuminate the path through forgiveness, proving redemption's proof not in vengeance, but in the mercy she had long craved. The spring bubbled ominously, steam rising like souls in torment, as the packs awaited her word, the rejected Omega become arbiter, her heart suspended in the ethical storm's eye. What was destiny, if not the freedom to choose war's end over its endless cycle? The light from her skin wavered, mirroring the dilemma, leaving the air thick with the scent of blood, snow, and the fragile hope of rebirth or ruin. The steam from the poisoned spring coiled upward like the breath of dying gods, mingling with the metallic bite of fresh blood on the wind. Elena's sigils blazed against her skin, a constellation of defiant light piercing the gray pallor of the gathering clouds, illuminating the fractured faces of the packs below. Eric knelt in the snow, disarmed and broken, his eyes darting between Thorn's blade and her glowing form, a traitor unmasked, his lies dissolving like frost under the Deuce's unyielding gaze. Cale Ironfang loomed at the periphery, his massive frame tensed for the charge, southern reinforcements' howls echoing from the ravines like a promise of endless war. The air thrummed with tension, heavy as the scent of pine sap and impending avalanche, every heartbeat a thunder in her chest. She stood at the precipice, the moral weight crushing her like the mountain's ancient stone. Freedom had always been her exile's cruel gift, the wild isolation of the ravines, unburdened by the pack's hierarchies and stairs. To choose vengeance now, to let Thorn's sword claim Eric and ignite the fray with Cale, would bind her to that world, the king's shadow, her light a tool for his reclaimed throne. Love's redemption twisted into duty's chain. Yet compassion stirred deeper, a spiritual fire kindled in the cave's hearthglow, urging her toward sacrifice. Forgive the traitor, mend the spring's poison with her Pathfinder's gift, and offer union, not as reward, but as proof that rebirth could rise from rejection's ashes. What was destiny, if not the liberty to shatter the cycle of blood for something tender, tragic, eternal? Thorn's grip on his sword faltered, his storm-gray eyes locking onto hers amid the chaos. Blood trickled from a shallow gash on his cheek, warm rivulets tracing the scars of old oaths, his melancholy a palpable ache in the bond that now pulsed between them like the moon's tidal pull. He had rejected her once, enforced the elders' decrees with a king's unyielding ethics, blind to the Deuce's weave. Now, in this visceral crucible, he sought her choice as equal, his voice a ragged whisper cutting through Cale's encroaching growl. Elena. The packs fracture further if we spill more, but mercy, can it heal what I've broken, what we've all allowed? Guilt shadowed his features. The ethical king confronting his failures, the isolation he had decreed, the traitor he had trusted, the realm he had failed to safeguard. Her heart tore, a visceral rip echoing the spring's cracked basin. The sigils surged, light spilling from her like molten silver, threading toward the tainted waters. Visions cascaded, paths of war where snow ran red eternal, Cale's conquest devouring the north, or one of fragile healing, her gift purifying the poison, binding the packs in reluctant unity under Thorn's tempered rule. But the cost clawed at her. To wield this power meant surrendering her solitude, weaving her fate irrevocably with his. Love was no gentle bloom, but a thorned vine, demanding she choose not power's throne, but compassion's quiet crown. Tears froze on her lashes, crystalline as the icicles overhead as she stepped forward, the snow yielding beneath her boots like a reluctant confession. Eric, she said, her voice steady despite the storm within, amplified by the sigil's radiant hum. The light enveloped the traitor, not in judgment's blaze, but a soft unveiling, exposing the fear that had twisted his ambition, the whispers of southern gold that had poisoned his soul. He flinched, the packs murmuring in awe and unease, their eyes, once averted in her presence, now fixed on the Omega who had become Oracle. Your betrayal birthed this ruin, but the Deuce offers paths beyond vengeance. Confess, aid in mending what you've shattered, and find redemption's edge, or cling to your chains, and fade into the wind's forgotten howl. Eric's face crumpled, the mask of deceit fracturing under her gaze. He bowed his head, a sob tearing from his throat, raw as the wind's bite. I saw only survival in the south shadow. The marks on you, they terrified us all. Forgive me if such a thing remains. The words hung, fragile as the steam rising from the spring, and Elena extended her hand, the light flowing from her sigils into the earth. It seeped into the cracks, veins of moonlight battling the black taint, the waters bubbling with renewed clarity, pure, shimmering under the emerging sun. The packs gasped, some shifting closer, their scents mingling hope with lingering doubt, the Deuce's spiritual breath stirring the air like a benediction. Kale roared then, lunging forward with claws extended, his form a blur of southern fury. But Thorn met him, their clash a symphony of snarls and steel, bodies tumbling into the snow in a whirlwind of blood and frost. Elena channeled her power instinctively, the sigils flaring to blind the rival Alpha with illusory storms, visions of avalanches and lunar eclipses that drove him back, staggering. The southern reinforcements hesitated at the ravine's edge, unnerved by the light that revealed hidden wards in the ice, paths closing against them like the Deuce's closing fist. Thorn rose victorious, pinning Kale with a final thrust, not to kill, but to subdue, his blade at the rival's throat, echoing Elena's mercy. "Yield," he growled, voice laced with the melancholy of a king reborn. "The North heals, not conquers. Join or flee, the choice is yours, as it was mine." Kale spat defiance, but his eyes flickered to the purified spring, the packs rallying behind Thorn with tentative huevos, faith rekindled, rejection's wounds beginning to scar over. He retreated, limping into the shadows with his forces, the wind carrying their withdrawal like a defeated sigh. Eric rose shakily, pledging his knowledge of southern rites to aid the mending, his confession a bridge toward fragile alliance. In the aftermath, as the sun gilded the snow in hues of reluctant gold, Elena turned to Thorn. Their hands met, fingers intertwining amid the sigil's fading glow, the bond sealing in a rush of warmth that chased the cold from her veins. It was union, not as fairy tale reward, but as hard-won rebirth, love's redemption proven in sacrifice, her light illuminating his path as his strength sheltered hers. Yet the cost lingered, a spiritual echo. Freedom tempered, not lost, in the choice of compassion over war's endless hunger. The packs encircled them, murmurs of the Pathfinder rising like prayers, the realm's fractures beginning to knit under the moon's watchful eye. Thorn drew her close, his breath warm against her temple, the scent of pine and blood a testament to trials endured. "You've crowned us both, Elena, not with power, but with what mercy forges." Her heart swelled, tender amid the tragedy as the wind softened to a whisper, carrying the promise of winters yet to thaw. But in the quiet, doubt's faint shadow remained. Could this union endure the realm's lingering storms, or would rebirth demand further sacrifice? The spring's waters lapped gently now, a rhythmic affirmation, leaving her suspended in the glow of choice made, destiny claimed, not imposed, but embraced. The gentle lap of the purified spring echoed like a heartbeat reborn, its waters now a mirror of fractured moonlight, reflecting the tentative unity of the packs encircling the basin. Elena's sigils dimmed to a soft, persistent glow, threads of silver weaving across her skin like the Deuce's final stitches in a torn veil. The air, once thick with the acrid bite of poison and blood, now carried the crisp scent of thawing pine and distant rain, a promise of renewal amid the snow's unyielding white. Thorn's arm encircled her waist, his touch a steady anchor, warm against the chill that still lingered in her bones. But the union they had forged felt fragile, like ice bridging a chasm, beautiful yet prone to crack under unseen pressures. She leaned into him, her head resting against the broad plane of his chest, where the rhythm of his heart synced with hers, a visceral cadence that drowned out the pack's murmurs. The warriors and Omegas watched them with eyes wide, some reverent, others wary, their sense a tapestry of awe and residual fear. Eric stood apart, humbled and chained by vines of woven moonlight her power had summoned from the earth, his confession a raw wound that bled into the collective memory. Kyle's retreat had bought them breath, but the southern threat loomed like storm clouds on the horizon, a reminder that redemption was no singular act, but a path etched in ongoing sacrifice. Elena's chest tightened, the weight of her choice settling deeper. She had illuminated mercy's way, purifying the spring and binding the fractured packs, yet freedom's whisper haunted her still, the wild ravines calling, unburdened by thrones and duties that could eclipse her light. Thorn's breath stirred her hair, pine-scented and laced with the faint copper of healed wounds. "We've mended the heart of it," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her, carrying the melancholy of a king who had glimpsed his own redemption in her gaze. The lunar springs flow again, the packs rally under one banner, not through conquest, but your gift. You've given me back what guilt had stolen, the strength to choose compassion over the blade. His fingers traced the edge of a sigil on her wrist, the touch electric, igniting a warmth that spread like fire through frozen veins. It was love, undeniable now, not the impulsive rush of instinct, but a deliberate forging. Resisted in the ravine's shadows, rationalized in the cave's firelight, accepted in the spring's clarifying glow. Yet even in this tenderness, tragedy lingered. His crown, reclaimed through her, demanded she share its burdens. Her Pathfinder's power no longer solitary, but woven into the realm's fate. She pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes, storm-gray depths softened by gratitude, yet shadowed by the ethical scars of his past decrees. The wind picked up, whispering through the pines like the Deuce's sigh, carrying faint weavos from the distant borders. Scouts reporting southern stirrings, alliances fracturing under the weight of Kale's wounded pride. Elena's sigils flickered in response, visions brushing her mind, paths diverging once more, one where war reignited and her light became a weapon, another of quiet healing, where sacrifice tempered power into enduring peace. Faith warred with despair in her core. She had been rejected as monster, born into isolation's cruel forge, only to emerge as the realm's last hope. But rebirth demanded more than union. It required her to surrender the exile's freedom, to let love prove itself not as reward, but as the ultimate test. Could she illuminate without being consumed? The packs drew closer, their forms a circle of fur and steel under the emerging moon, its pale face cresting the mountain peaks like a watchful elder. An elder beta, her fur streaked with silver, stepped forward, voice trembling with the spiritual fervor of one who had witnessed prophecy unfold. "Pathfinder," she intoned, kneeling in the snow, "the Deusa has spoken through you. Guide us from this ruin. Teach us to choose mercy as you have." Murmurs swelled, a chorus of tentative hope, but Elena felt the pull of their expectations like chains forged in the glacial depths. Her power had revealed hidden wards in the ravines, paths to untainted springs and forgotten temples, but wielding it meant anchoring here, beside Thorn, her light the beacon for a realm still bleeding from betrayal's bite. She turned to him fully, the snow crunching softly under her shift, the cold nipping at her exposed skin like a reminder of solitude's edge. "This union, it's my choice, as much as yours," she said, her words threading the air with quiet resolve, amplified by the sigil's subtle hum. "I've walked the shadows alone, marked as unclean, believing strength lay in endurance's silence. But you've shown me otherwise. Redemption isn't solitary. It's the mercy we extend, even when it costs our freedom." Tears welled again, not freezing this time, but tracing warm paths down her cheeks, the salt mingling with the spring's mist. Thorn cupped her face, his thumb brushing them away, the gesture tender amid the epic sweep of mountains and moon, his melancholy yielding to a profound peace. "Then stay," he whispered, "not as subject, but as equal. Let our bond heal what rejection broke, for the packs, for us." The choice crystallized in that moment, visceral as blood on snow. sacrifice her wild isolation for this shared rebirth, curing the realm's wounds with her light, while Thorn's ethical rule tempered power with compassion. She nodded, the sigils blazing one final time, a radiant affirmation that bathed the gathering in silver. Paths unfolding in their minds, visions of unity against the southern tide, destiny claimed through liberty's deliberate yield. The Pax howled then, a unified cry rising to the moon, Uivos blending with the wind's triumphant gust, fire in their throats like hearth flames rekindled. As the night deepened, Elena stood with Thorn at the spring's edge, their hands clasped, the water's reflection capturing their intertwined forms, a king and his pathfinder reborn from tragedy's forge. Love had transcended hierarchies, proving redemption's truth, not in glory's crown, but in the quiet strength of choices made under the Deuce's gaze. Yet in the heart of this union, a spiritual echo remained, the flame of faith against despair's embers, a reminder that rebirth was eternal vigilance. The moon hung full, benevolent now, its light weaving through the snow like threads of fate sealed, the ravine's howls fading to a lullaby of hope. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.